Daniel Mercer had lived near the forest reserve for almost 3 years, long enough to learn the rhythms of the place, the way the tree line shifted in the wind, the sounds that came after dark, the animals that moved along the edges of his property without ever crossing over. He had learned one rule in all that time, one rule that every neighbor, every ranger, every old-timer in the county had told him the moment he moved in: don't get involved with wild animals. It seemed simple enough, and for 3 years Daniel had kept that rule without much effort, until a Tuesday evening in late October, when he stepped out onto his back porch with a cup of coffee and saw something sitting at the far edge of his fence line. Small, dark, still. He set the coffee down. It was a gorilla cub. Couldn't have been more than a few months old, sitting in the tall grass just beyond the wooden post, perfectly motionless, like it had always been there, like it belonged. Daniel stood on that porch for a long moment and didn't move. He told himself it would leave, that the mother was nearby, that this was just one of those strange passing things that happened when you lived close to wild land. He went back inside. But the next evening when he stepped outside again, it was there. Same spot, same stillness. He watched it from the porch. It didn't run, didn't react to him at all. Just sat there with both hands wrapped around one of the fence posts, its small dark eyes pointed loosely in his direction. He told himself again, it'll leave on its own. It didn't. By the 4th evening, Daniel started to feel the first thread of unease pulling at him. Not fear. Exactly. Something quieter than that. The cub always appeared around the same time, always sat in the same place, and it never made a sound. No calling, no distress cry, nothing. Just that eerie, patient stillness, like it was waiting for something it didn't fully understand. On the 6th night, Daniel didn't go inside when it got dark. He sat in the porch chair and watched the cub until the light faded. And when he finally turned on the back porch lamp, he noticed something that hadn't been visible before. The cub wasn't looking at him. Not really. Its eyes were open, but they weren't tracking. They moved slightly, slowly, the way eyes move when they're not finding anything to hold on to. When the porch light came on, most animals would flinch or pull back. This one didn't react at all. Daniel leaned forward in his chair. He watched for another minute, and the feeling in his stomach grew heavier with every second. Then the cub let go of the fence post, and it didn't walk away. It swayed forward once, caught itself, and then simply collapsed into the grass. Daniel was off the porch before he even made a conscious decision to move. He crossed the yard, crouched down on the other side of the fence, and brought himself level with the cub. Up close, he could see the slow rise and fall of its chest, still breathing, but its small body was loose in a way that made his jaw tighten. He reached out carefully and held his open hand a few inches from the cub's face. No reaction. He moved his hand slowly to the left. Nothing. He moved it right. The cub's eyes shifted, but only slightly. Delayed, drifting, like they were searching and couldn't quite land. Daniel sat back on his heels in the cold grass. This cub wasn't just weak. It wasn't just lost or separated or disoriented the way young animals sometimes get. It couldn't see properly. He didn't know how bad it was. He didn't know if it was born that way or if something had happened. But in that moment, in the dim glow of the porch light, the reality of what he was looking at settled into him like a stone dropping into still water. A blind gorilla cub, alone, no mother, no troop within miles as far as anyone had ever reported, sitting at the edge of a residential property at nightfall, in territory where foxes and coyotes moved freely once the sun went down. Long enough for the cold to work its way through his jacket, long enough to have the argument with himself that he already knew he was going to lose. He knew the rule. He'd been told the rule. He believed in the rule. Wild animals belong to the wild. Getting involved creates dependency, creates problems, creates situations that rarely end well for the animal or the person. He knew all of that. He went inside anyway. He came back 2 minutes later with a bowl of water and a piece of fruit from the kitchen counter. He set both of them down on his side of the fence, far enough back that the cub would have to move to reach them, close enough that it might. He went to bed telling himself it was a one-time thing. It wasn't. The next morning, the fruit was gone and the water bowl was nearly empty. Daniel refilled both and moved them to the same spot. That evening, the cub appeared again, this time from a slightly different angle, navigating the tall grass with slow, deliberate steps, pausing every few feet, its nose working. It wasn't using its eyes to find the food. It was following the smell,
For the first
moving in
time
careful,
since it appeared at
confident
the
arcs
fence,
until
it
it
looks
reached
like
the
something
bowl,
that isn't
then
simply
settling down to
surviving
eat
from
with the
one
quiet
moment to the
focus of an
next.
animal that had
It
learned
looks
to
like
trust
something
its
that
other
has allowed
senses
itself to
completely.
rest.
Daniel watched from the porch and said nothing. This went on for 4 days. A quiet routine, fragile and wordless, food at the fence line, water in the same bowl. The cub
I am
arriving each
monitoring
evening
the
like it had
situation,
somewhere to be. On the fifth morning,
not
Daniel came
participating
outside
in it.
earlier than usual and found something he hadn't expected. The cub was already there, but it wasn't alone. Sitting about 3 feet away from it, completely relaxed, with his big golden head tilted slightly to one side, was Remy, Daniel's 8-year-old golden retriever, the most even-tempered animal he'd ever owned.
Small
A dog
things.
that had never once shown aggression
That's all
toward
they
anything
are.
in his entire life. Remy wasn't barking, wasn't growling, wasn't doing anything really. He was just sitting there in the morning light, watching the cub eat, with the calm patience of a dog who had simply decided this was where he wanted to be. Daniel stopped walking. He didn't call the dog back. For a long moment, neither animal moved. Then the cub lifted its head. Its nose worked the air, slow and methodical. It turned its face in Remy's direction, and something shifted in its posture. Not fear, something else. It took one step forward, stopped, took another, and stopped again. Remy didn't move.
Come on,
the cub
boy.
came close enough
Let's
to touch.
go.
It hesitated, that particular hesitation of an animal deciding whether to trust, and then it leaned sideways and pressed its small body against the dog's side. Remy
Where the
exhaled
golden
slowly
retriever looks,
and lay down in
the
the
gorilla
grass.
cub looks.
The cub stayed exactly where it
I know
was.
it sounds strange,
Daniel
but
stood
they
at
have
the
a
edge of the
blind
porch and
gorilla
watched the
cub
two of them
being
settle
led by
there
a
together in the
golden
quiet
retriever.
morning, and he didn't say a word. There was something
That's
about
what I
what he was
said.
seeing that felt strangely
For now,
important. The cub had been
seems
appearing at
okay.
his fence for almost 2 weeks. It had taken food from him, water from him, shelter in the near dark of his yard. But it hadn't chosen him. It had chosen the dog. That night, when the temperature dropped and the wind picked up from the north, Daniel expected the cub to disappear into the grass the way it always did. Instead, he found both of them near the back steps. Remy curled in his usual spot, the cub tucked firmly against him, one small hand gripping loosely at the dog's fur. The cub's breathing was slow and even. For the first time since it had appeared at his fence, it looked like something that wasn't simply surviving from one moment to the next. It looked like something that had finally, cautiously, allowed itself to rest. Daniel stood at the back door for a moment in the cold, watching them sleep. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know what this was becoming or how it was going to end. He only knew that the animal curled against his dog in the darkness was alive right now, tonight, in a way it might not have been if the fence had been a few miles further from the tree line. And that somewhere between the first night and this one, the rule he'd been given, don't get involved, had already been quietly, irreversibly broken. The days that followed settled into something Daniel hadn't planned for, a routine, quiet, unannounced, the way routines often form, not by decision, but by repetition. Morning feeding, evening check, Remy outside longer than usual, lying in the grass near the fence while the cub moved around him in slow exploratory circles. Daniel watched from a distance most of the time. That part was deliberate. He kept himself back, kept his presence minimal, told himself he was simply monitoring the situation, not participating in it. There's a difference, he reasoned, between letting something happen and being responsible for it. But he started buying more fruit. He moved the water bowl to a more sheltered spot near the back steps, out of the wind. He put an old wooden crate upside down near the fence, so the cub had something solid to lean against when it rested. Small things, practical things. He told himself that's all they were. What he couldn't ignore and couldn't entirely explain was the way the cub had reorganized itself around Remy. Within a week, the dog had become something the cub clearly couldn't function well without. Not in an anxious, frantic way, in a deeply practical one. Remy moved and the cub followed. Not by sight, its vision remained what it had always been, clouded and unreliable, but by sound, by proximity, by the faint pressure of the dog's warmth nearby. If Remy shifted his position in the yard, the cub would pause whatever it was doing, lift its head, locate the sound of the dog's breathing, or the soft pad of his paws on the ground, and adjust its own path accordingly. It was slow at first, tentative, but it became more fluid with every passing day. The cub learned the shape of the yard through Remy, the way a person might learn a dark room by trailing their hand along the wall. The dog was the wall, the anchor, the one fixed point that made everything else navigable. By the end of the second week, Daniel noticed something that stopped him mid-step one morning. He had come outside and called Remy's name, something he did a dozen times a day without thinking. The dog looked up from across the yard, but the cub, sitting near the back steps, lifted its head at exactly the same moment and turned in exactly the direction Daniel was standing.
End of the week.
Not because it had recognized his voice. It had learned to track Remy's attention. Where the dog looked, the cub looked. The cub was reading the dog the way a
He had told
navigator reads a
himself from the
compass.
beginning
Daniel
not to
didn't
get
say anything
attached.
about it to anyone for
What
a
he
few
hadn't
days.
accounted
There wasn't
for
really
was that
anyone
the
to say
gorilla
it to.
cub had
He
gotten
lived alone,
attached
worked
too.
from home doing project consulting, and kept mostly to himself. His nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the road. He had the kind of life that made it easy to let things unfold without outside commentary. But he did call his sister Lisa one evening. She had grown up with him on the edge of that same county, and she had a practical, no-nonsense way of processing information that he'd always found grounding. He told her about the cub, about the blindness, about Remy. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Daniel," she said, "you know this can't go on forever." He told her he knew. The wildlife people will get involved eventually. Someone will report it, or you'll have to. He told her he knew that too.
He does not have a better option.
Is it okay? She asked.
This is the
Not
right
about the
thing.
situation, about
The
the cub.
only thing.
He looked out the back window at the
But he
two of them in
turns
the
away
fading
from it.
afternoon light. Remy flat on his side, legs stretched out, the cub sitting upright against him, one hand resting on the dog's ribs. "For now," he said. "Yeah, it seems okay." He allowed himself to believe that was enough for a little while longer. He cleared a small space along the side of the house. Not inside. He was firm about that. The line between outside and inside felt important to him, a boundary he wasn't willing to cross because crossing it meant something he wasn't ready to name. But the space along the side of the house was sheltered. 3 walls, an overhang,
When
out of the
handlers
rain.
approach
He
with
put down an
food,
old tarp,
she does
a
not
folded
respond
blanket,
with
the
aggression
wooden
or
crate.
fear.
It wasn't
She
much.
simply
It kept
turns
them dry.
away.
Remy adopted
You've
the
lost
space
more
immediately
weight.
and without ceremony. The way good
not
dogs
eating
adopt
enough.
whatever space you give them.
And
The
you
cub
haven't
followed.
moved
Nights
all
got
morning.
easier. For the cub, at least.
Hey,
For
can you
Daniel,
hear that?
they got more
Come on,
complicated.
sweetie, just look up
He would
for a
lie
second.
awake sometimes, running through the logistics of what he was doing. He wasn't equipped for this. He had no training in wildlife, no resources, no real plan. The cub was growing, slowly but visibly. It was eating better, moving with more confidence in the familiar space of the yard. It had started to show personality, a quiet, watchful curiosity that occasionally tipped over into something almost playful when Remy was in a good mood. The dog would shake himself or sneeze unexpectedly,
gorilla
and the
cub's
cub would
physical
startle,
health is
then reach
becoming
out
a
and touch the
concern.
dog's face
Not
with both
illness,
hands, as if
nothing
verifying it was
treatable
still
with
there.
medication. She
Those
is not
moments were hard to
injured.
watch without
gorilla
feeling
cub
something,
has
and
withdrawn
that was the problem.
completely.
They have
Attachment
seen
had
this
entered the
before in
picture.
young animals
Not
after
just the cub's
separation,
attachment
but
to
not
Remy,
usually
that
this
had been there
fast
almost
and
from
not
the
usually
beginning,
this total.
but something more layered than
Yes,
that.
they think
The
so.
cub
I
had
know
begun to
this is
tolerate Daniel's
unconventional,
proximity. It
but
no
they
longer
would like
pulled
to
back
try
when he came
something.
close. It
They
didn't
would
seek
like
him out,
him to bring
not
the
the way it
golden
sought the dog,
retriever.
but it had stopped reacting to his
I will
presence
read
with
that
the
morning.
held-breath weariness of a wild animal near a stranger.
morning?
He had become, in whatever small way, part of the landscape it trusted. He noticed the exact moment it happened. He'd been refilling the water bowl one afternoon, crouched down, moving slowly the way he always did, and the cub had been sitting 2 feet away watching Remy.
And down
Without
this
any
hallway
particular
are the
intention, it
primary
had reached out one
enclosures.
hand and
We
brushed
are
its
very
knuckles across
proud of the
Daniel's
work we
forearm.
do here.
Not
Oh,
a
look,
grab,
there he is.
not even
Yes.
really a touch,
He hasn't
just a
moved an
graze,
inch.
like
We'll
checking
go in
whether he was
slowly,
real.
let him lead.
He hadn't moved. The cub had pulled its hand back and returned its attention to the dog. Daniel had stayed crouched by the water bowl for longer than necessary. This was not temporary anymore. He knew that. He had probably known it for longer than he was willing to admit. What had started as a bowl of water and a piece of fruit had become something with weight and consequence,
gorilla
something
cub
that would
turning
require
from
an
the
actual
corner by
decision.
inches,
He just hadn't made it yet.
slow and
The storm
uncertain,
came on a
the
Thursday
way
night in
something
November.
moves
Not
when
a
it
violent
doesn't yet-
storm, not the dramatic kind that breaks trees and knocks out power lines. Just a heavy, low-pressure system that rolled in after dark with deep rolling thunder and a hard, sustained rain that rattled the windows and turned the yard to mud. The kind of storm that felt bigger than it was because of the dark. Daniel was reading when the first crack of thunder hit. He heard Remy's nails on the back steps immediately after. Then a sound he hadn't heard the cub make before. Not quite a scream, not quite a cry, something between the two. Raw and sharp, and laced with pure panic. He was on his feet before he finished processing what it was. By the time he got outside with a flashlight, the rain was coming down hard and cold.
He's
He swept the
rebuilding
beam
the
across the
rhythm
yard and
naturally.
couldn't find either of them for a
Yes,
long,
he
sick moment.
understands
Then the
connection
beam caught
without
movement near the
constant
far corner of
contact
the
now.
fence. The cub was pressed into the corner post, both arms wrapped around it, rocking. The thunder rolled again and the cub made that sound again. Short, desperate, completely undone. Remy appeared from the darkness at a jog. Daniel watched the dog
there,
cover the
little
distance
one.
across the
It's
muddy
just
yard
me, Tom.
and press himself
You're
directly
doing great
against
with
the
the
cub
bottle.
without hesitation.
Easy
Not gently,
now.
solidly, the full weight of his body
That's
against
it.
the smaller one, the way a
Nice
good
and
dog
slow,
braces
you're
against
doing
something
well.
that's trembling. The cub's
We'll
arms
take our
unwrapped
time,
from the
won't we?
fence post and wrapped around the dog instead. The rocking slowed, the sound stopped.
Within
Remy
a month,
stayed perfectly
the gorilla
still.
cub
They
no
stayed like
longer
that for a long
returning to the
time.
corner.
The rain came down,
Moving
and
through
Daniel
the
stood in the
enclosure
yard
with the
holding a
careful
flashlight, completely soaked, watching a dog hold a frightened blind gorilla cub through a storm. He brought them inside that night, just into the laundry room, just off the back hallway, just for the storm. That's what he told himself. He sat on the floor with them until the thunder moved off to the east, and the rain softened, and the cub's grip on Remy finally loosened into sleep. He thought about what his sister had said. This can't go on forever. She was right. He'd known it the whole time. But knowing something and being ready to act on it are two entirely different things, and Daniel had not yet crossed that distance. 3 days later, the distance crossed itself. He was out front checking the mail when a white truck with a County Wildlife Services logo pulled into his driveway. The officer who climbed out was a man in his mid-40s, professional, polite, with the particular economy of movement that comes from years of doing difficult things without drama. His name was Alan Briggs. Someone, he explained, had called in a report. A neighbor or a hiker who'd come along the fence line. He'd been sent to investigate. Daniel didn't try to hide anything. He walked Briggs around back and let him see the setup, the food, the water, the cleared space along the side of the house. The cub, sitting near the back steps with Remy lying beside it in the thin winter sun. Briggs watched for a moment without speaking. Then he turned to Daniel with the careful, neutral expression of someone about to say something the other person isn't going to want to hear. She can't stay here, he said. You know that. Daniel nodded. It's not a question of whether you've done a good job. You have, genuinely. But this animal needs professional rehabilitation. There's a facility about 40 miles from here. They have the right environment, veterinary staff, a long-term plan. He paused. The longer she stays here, the harder the transition becomes. Daniel looked at the cub. The cub was leaning against Remy, one hand on the dog's shoulder, completely unaware of what was being decided 6 feet away. How soon? Daniel asked. End of the week, Briggs said. I can arrange transport, Daniel said.
We're conducting a small
it was the right
behavioral
decision.
study
He knew
and would
it was
like
the
you to
right decision.
participate in
Every
an
reasonable
observation
part of
visit.
his thinking confirmed it was the right decision. And yet that evening,
Look,
watching
over
the
there by
cub
the
curl
water.
against Remy in the
I
last
think
of
I
the
see it.
daylight, he felt the particular weight of a right decision that doesn't feel like one. He had told himself from the beginning not to get attached. That rule, the first one, the simple one, he'd understood the wisdom of it even as he was breaking it. Attachment made things harder, complicated things that should stay uncomplicated. But there was something he hadn't accounted for, hadn't really considered in all those weeks of careful, deliberate distance. The cub had gotten attached too, and as he stood at the back window watching her sleep, he found himself wondering, with a quiet dread he couldn't quite push aside, what was going to happen when the truck arrived. He didn't have to wonder long, because when Friday came and the transport carrier sat open in the yard, and Briggs reached out slowly toward the cub with practiced, gentle hands, she knew. She didn't understand what a truck was, or a rehabilitation center, or why this was happening, but she knew something was being taken, some warmth, some anger, some essential thing she had built her small surviving world around. She screamed, not the panic storm cry from the week before, something older than that, something that had nothing to do with thunder or darkness. She twisted and reached backward with both arms, reaching for the one thing she knew. And Remy, who had watched everything from a distance with the confused, helpless calm of a dog who doesn't understand separation,
Unhurried,
lifted his head and let out one long, low sound from somewhere deep in his chest.
Whatever the
It wasn't a
moment
bark,
was,
it was something
complete
quieter
on
and
its
worse than a
own
bark.
terms.
Daniel turned away from it. He didn't have a better option. That was the truth of it. This was the right thing. The only thing. But as the truck pulled out of the driveway, and the sound faded, and Remy stood at the edge of the property staring down the empty road, Daniel understood in the fullest and most irreversible way that this story was not finished. Something had just begun, and he had absolutely no idea how it was going to end. The rehabilitation center was clean, well-staffed, and exactly what it was supposed to be. The enclosure was spacious, the staff were experienced, everything about it was correct. The cub wanted none of it. She arrived in silence, that first silence worse than the screaming had been, and went directly to the corner farthest from the staff, farthest from the light, and stayed there. She didn't eat the first day, didn't drink much. When the handlers approached with food, she didn't respond with aggression or fear. She simply turned away, with the quiet deliberateness of an animal that had decided the world on offer wasn't one she wanted any part of. By day 3, the staff noted she had lost weight. By day 5, she had stopped responding to sound. Back at the house, Remy wasn't eating well either. He checked the back steps every morning with the focused patience of a dog who doesn't understand permanent. He would stand at the fence line for long stretches, nose working, then walk back to the porch and lie down facing the yard, waiting. Daniel watched him do it every day and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say. On the 6th day, Daniel got a call from the center. The woman on the phone was a senior handler named Grace.
Just slightly.
Her voice was calm
Just
but carried the
barely.
particular weight
The
of
first
someone
movement
choosing
in
words
6
carefully.
days that came-
The cub's physical health, she said, was becoming a concern, not illness, nothing they could treat with medication. She wasn't injured. She wasn't sick in any conventional sense. She's withdrawn, Grace said. Completely. We've seen this before in young animals after separation, but not usually this fast, and not usually this total. A pause. Our
There
vet
you
thinks it's
go.
emotional. She's not adjusting because she doesn't want to adjust.
Nice and
Something she was
slow.
bonded to
That's
isn't
a
here,
good
and her
boy.
system
You're
knows
doing
it.
so
Daniel was
well.
quiet for a
Memory
moment.
image,
The
the
dog,
gorilla
he
cub
said.
no
We
longer in
think
the
so,
corner,
yes.
moving through
Grace's
the
voice was
enclosure,
steady.
exploring.
I know this is
1 month of
unconventional,
patient,
but we'd like to
unhurried
try
work
something.
visible in
We'd
the
like you to
movement.
bring him. Daniel
She's
looked
not the
across the
frail
kitchen at Remy,
creature she
who was
once
lying near the
was.
back door, head
Look
on
at
his
that
paws, eyes half
resilience.
open,
Such
pointed at nothing in
profound
particular.
growth.
He said he'd be there in the morning. The drive was 40 miles of flat highway and thin winter light. Remy sat in the back seat and looked out the window the whole way, calm and unknowing. Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He thought about what Grace had said, her system knows it, and found he couldn't argue with the simplicity of it. Some losses didn't need explaining. They registered at a level beneath language, beneath thought, in whatever part of a living thing understands warmth and presence, and the specific weight of something familiar pressed against it in the dark. They arrived mid-morning. Grace met them at the entrance and walked them through the facility without much small talk. She stopped at the door to the cub's enclosure. Through the observation window, Daniel could see her in the far corner. Still, too still, the same corner she'd claimed on the first day. Grace looked at Remy, then at Daniel. We'll go in slowly, she said
The gorilla,
quietly. Let him
alive
lead.
in the habitat
She opened the
behind
door.
him,
Remy walked
was
in
the
ahead of
result
him,
of that
nose
rule
down,
being
moving in
broken.
that quiet, purposeful way he had.
sat with
Not
that.
cautious, not anxious, just present. He crossed the enclosure floor and stopped a few feet from the corner. The cub didn't move. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then her nose lifted, just slightly, just barely, like something catching at the edge of a dream. The nose lifted, then the head, slow and uncertain, the way something moves when it doesn't yet trust what it's sensing. Her whole body had been still for 6 days. Now it wasn't. She turned from the corner by inches. Her clouded eyes found nothing, the way they never did. But her nose was working steadily now, pulling in something that her entire nervous system recognized before her mind could catch up.
Shelter in the
She took
near
one
dark
step
of his
forward,
yard.
stopped, took another. Remy didn't move toward her. He just stayed where he was and let her come. When she reached him, she didn't rush. She pressed her face against the side of his neck and held it there. Both hands found his fur. Her breathing, which Grace had described to Daniel as shallow and irregular for days, slowed into something even and deep. Nobody in the room said anything.
We'd like
Grace
you to bring
exhaled
him.
quietly beside Daniel. He didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the two of them in the center of the enclosure, the old golden dog and the small dark cub, and felt something loosen
Let
in his
him
chest
lead.
that he hadn't realized had been held tight. That afternoon, for the first time in 6 days, she ate. So did the weeks that followed were slow and deliberate. Grace and her team had worked with traumatized animals long enough to know that speed was the enemy of real recovery. They didn't push. They let the rhythm rebuild
It
itself
wasn't
naturally.
the same as what
Remy
she
present
had
for
with the
certain
golden
hours each day,
retriever.
then absent,
It was its
then
own
present
thing.
again, teaching her gently and
Quieter.
without force. That connection
real.
didn't have to mean constant contact, that the people around her could be trusted, that the world was larger than one corner of one enclosure and worth exploring. She began to move more, to eat consistently, to engage with the enrichment objects the staff placed in her space. One of the handlers, a quiet young man named Tom, discovered she would follow his voice the same way she'd once followed Remy's movement. He began talking to her during feedings. Simple, steady words, nothing remarkable, just presence turned into sound. Within a month, she had stopped returning to the corner. Daniel visited on weekends when he could. He would sit outside the enclosure and watch her move through the space with the careful, confident navigation of an animal that had learned its environment by heart. She recognized him now, not visually, but by the particular combination of his footstep and his scent, and she would orient toward him briefly when he arrived, the way you might glance toward a familiar face across a room. It wasn't the same as what she had with Remy. It was its own thing, quieter, but real. 3 years passed. The center worked with a protected wildlife reserve, 4 states away. a large managed habitat where a small group of gorillas lived under monitored conditions, wild enough to be real, safe enough to be sustainable. The release was planned carefully, introduced gradually, done right. Daniel drove out for it. He stood with Grace at the observation post on the morning they opened the habitat gate and watched her walk through it, bigger now, moving with a slow and certain weight, and disappear into the tree line without looking back. That was how it should be. He knew that. He drove home the long way. Remy was in the back seat, gray around the muzzle now, sleeping most of the drive. An old dog who had done something extraordinary without ever knowing it. Symbolistarent. What he had mile, watermolded, but the mile fund. 8 months after the release, the reserve contacted Daniel with an unusual request. A small team was conducting a behavioral study and wanted him to participate in an observation visit. They didn't explain exactly why they wanted him specifically. He went anyway. He walked out to the observation area with Grace and 2 researchers, and they waited. After about 20 minutes, movement appeared at the tree line. She came out slowly, not all the way. She stopped at the edge in the partial shade and stood there. The researchers made quiet notes. Daniel didn't move. She lifted her head. Her nose worked the air with the same slow, methodical certainty it always had. Then she was still. She didn't come closer. She didn't need to. Whatever she was doing, whatever that moment was, it was complete on its own terms. Recognition without reunion, remembering without returning. After a minute or two, she turned and walked back into the trees. The researchers exchanged a look. Grace smiled at the ground. Daniel stood at the observation rail a little longer than the others. He thought about a Tuesday evening in late October 3 years ago. A small dark shape at the edge of a fence line. A bowl of water. A rule he'd told himself he was going to keep. He thought about Remy pressing his body against a terrified cub in a cold, rainy yard in the middle of the night. Not because he was trained to, not because he understood what was at stake, but simply because something small and frightened was beside him, and that was enough of a reason. He thought about what survival actually requires, not just food and shelter and safety, something harder to name than any of those things, something that can't be prescribed or planned or provided by the most well-equipped facility in the world if it isn't there. Connection, the specific, irreplaceable knowledge that you are not alone. He walked back to the car. Remy was asleep in the back seat, warm in the afternoon light, dreaming whatever old dogs dream. Daniel sat there for a moment before starting the engine. Sometimes the most important thing you can offer isn't expertise, or resources, or even the right decision made at the right time. Sometimes it's just staying, just being present, just not walking away when something small and lost shows up at the edge of what you know. That, in the end, is what had saved her. Not strength, connection.